Speaking now in the beginning of December, I would say that we can identify a handful of things that we should keep an eye on. One, of course, is the buildup of Russian troops at the Ukrainian border. Another is the status of Taiwan. Another is the risk of an economic slowdown in China due to overinvestment in property and overextended real estate developers. And another would be the resiliency of public health to variants of COVID. Well, I think that central banks will base their decisions on data that are coming in. And I think that they'll be hesitant to act precipitously lest they stall economic growth. I'd also note that the governments that own the central banks are benefiting from the high negative real interest rates to ease their public debt burden. So you have a bit of fiscal dominance going on. As central banks terminate their bond buying and begin to raise interest rates, we can expect that the bond markets are going to sell off and the equity market volatility will be higher than normal. I think we've seen the impact already. We've seen it in lower participation rates in the labor market. We've seen it in supply chain disruptions. We've seen it in the deterioration of public finances and restrictions on the movement of people, in a decay of social trust. Over time, people will learn to cope with COVID and its variants, partly due to vaccination rates, herd immunity, and better COVID treatment. Many countries are reevaluating their exposure to trade disruptions coming from geopolitical motives. And as these countries try to bring the production of essential goods onshore, the global supply chain may never recover. Some of it certainly will ease, like the bottlenecks at the ports. And eventually people will be induced back into the labor market and the participation rate will rise. So that's, those things will pass. But in terms of, key inputs and into iPhones and things that you need for technology and whatnot, there's certainly going to be more emphasis in trying to have some of that production onshore. The same thing for essential health items. And so that simply is not going to be, you're not going to allow to have 80–90% of that material produced outside your country. And it's going to be a bit the same for vaccines because people, don't export their vaccines in the period of a pandemic. So you're not going to want to have to rely on a foreign country in a health crisis. After the Winter Olympics and the Chinese Communist Party Congress, Xi Jinping will have greater freedom to intimidate Taiwan. Although this intimidation will not likely result in hostility, it could result in economic recriminations that would be disruptive. Combined with the sell-off in the bond and equity markets for monetary tightening, such geopolitical events could make 2022 a bad year economically, and which in turn would influence the US midterm elections in November. Well, the government needs to preserve some fiscal space to address extraordinary circumstances, such as a war, a recession, or a pandemic. Now, it was good policy to redress the recession caused by COVID, not only by allowing automatic fiscal stabilizers to operate, but also by additional measures. However, once the extraordinary circumstances no longer are present, governments need to begin to restore their balance sheets by running primary fiscal surpluses in order to reduce government debt as a share of output. The risk is that without such fiscal adjustments, a government could face a crisis and not be able to finance its exceptional needs. In these circumstances, the currency collapses and the government can't roll over its debt. It could then default or try to monetize the debt through central bank emission, leading to high inflation. Well, debt for a household is trickier than debt for a government or a corporation because a household has a lifetime cycle. The breadwinners of a household have key earning years, say between 30 and 60, and then years when they are drawing from their public and private pensions and from their savings. Households that remain highly indebted once their key earning years have ended, or who lose a key earner's salary during an economic downturn, will find that they have not only exhausted their ability to borrow further, but they'll have to allocate an intolerably high portion of their disposable income to debt service or default and forfeit whatever collateral they have given as security for the debt. Now, such situations can exacerbate the economic downturn and can even lead to social unrest. Well, carbon pricing would help. Increasing nuclear energy share of electricity production would help. The solution is going to have to come from technological development. I don't think it's going to come from conservation. However, just as we transitioned from whale oil to petrol, as we were pushing the whales to extinction 150 years ago, so too do I think we'll find a solution to keep the lights on before we roast ourselves.